so happy that everyone's here today. One of my favorite authors, Ross will love this, Christopher Hitchens once said, everybody has a book in them, and for most people that's exactly where it should stay. Obviously for these two, and also Julia Spiro and other people in the room, that's not the case. And so Becky Cooper here, longtime friend from Adams and from Life, as of now obviously, is a very talented journalist and writer herself, former New Yorker editorial staff writer, the author of 3 books, Mapping Manhattan, which came out when I was living in Shanghai, and I wanted her to do Mapping Shanghai, which we can still talk about, as well as a wine book, and then most recently, We Keep the Dead Close, where she honed her investigative chops, and it dovetails nicely with Ross's new book, which we're obviously here to celebrate. Ross, obviously, author of Bear Witness, and a very good friend of mine. We've been running around today. I wish it was cooler. Spent a long time writing this book and reporting from Honduras, and so I'm excited for this conversation, and it's going to be great. So thank you. Yeah, I'm going to turn that
I'll wait for the music to be off.
Yeah.
My voice famously does not carry.
Okay. It's actually
It's a good
background.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Good. Can everyone hear me at this level of speaking?
Woo!
Awesome. I just want to do a brief sort of intro into our conversation before we start, and also to thank Ryan for setting this up and you all for coming. This is really a remarkable aspect of reunion. The last email I got from you, I checked, was a forwarded invite 15 years ago to a live party. And then basically nothing. And then a text last April that was like, hey, I'm writing a book. I have questions about a fact-checking protocol. And fast forward to now, and you've come out with the most remarkable, diligently reported, really humanly thoughtful, especially about the nuances that you portray in the characters in the book, masterpiece. So I have many questions about. And truly, there's never a more important time to talk about impunity and to people who believe that they can counter the consequences of systemic failure. But I just wanted to, Ross didn't want to read anything, but I do think it's important to have a little paragraph of sample of the book, which came really early on and was sort of fundamental to my experience of the book. So I'm going to read a paragraph of it.
I like that.
For you. This was page 8, so really early days. It's describing these early conversations between the two main characters, Kurt and Carlos, who are these middle-aged dads. You'll tell it much better than I, but just to set it up. They are kind of starting to hatch a kind of cloak and dagger, you describe it, plan. And this is the setup. This emboldening quality of their discourse would eventually get them into entanglements with a military-grade serial killer, a shady tycoon who had about 1,000 armed men under his command, multiple attorney generals, the Honduran National Police's top brass, a sitting president, and someone who, according to the head of the DEA, was a central figure in one of the largest and most violent cocaine trafficking conspiracies in the world. But for the time being, the secret group, which is what these two middle-aged dads were dreaming up, was without a doubt the wildest thing they had ever cooked up. And I wrote in the margin, fuck yeah, Ross. And you just know from that moment you're in for a ride, so come along with us to it. So I guess my first question is, how does Ross, the stats concentrator, become Ross, the guy who just wrote that paragraph?
I worked on Wall Street after college, and then the next thing that I did, can you guys hear me back there, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Was I renovated the library in my hometown, which was named after my father, who passed away. And there wasn't like a deliberate thing that happened with me reconnecting with books out of that, but like right after that, I really did become a much, much bigger reader than ever before, and was just like consuming books all the time. And then I was working for criminologists, so one by the name of Mark Kleiman, another guy called David Kennedy. And you know, David Kennedy is a professor at John Jay, but he's really more than a professor. He's someone who goes into some of the most violent neighborhoods in the United States and works with police and prosecutors and the community to drastically reduce gun violence. And he has this amazing track record of success at doing that. And in the summer of maybe 2017 or so, he had read a book called Ghetto Side. Are you familiar with that one? Yeah, and it's really all about the problem of impunity in the United States. So I think this might surprise most people here, but whereas in other like wealthy democracies in Europe or Asia, maybe 90, 95, 97% of murders are solved. In the United States, it's more like 60%, 55%. And the majority of shootings are actually non-fatal, and the solve rate for those is even more disturbingly low. So he kind of hired me to research that problem and propose potential solutions for it. And the sort of capstone of all that was a symposium type of thing in New York, where a bunch of people with relevant expertises, the head New York City chief detectives, people like that were there. And Kurt Ver Beek, the subject of my book, video conferenced in. He couldn't fly out from Honduras because he was entangled in one of those things you sort of just alluded to. But yeah, it was like one of those moments where I just like felt my life kind of changing as it was happening, because I was so swept away by what he was saying, both in terms of like what it revealed about the impunity problems we have been studying, but also just like him as a person, what he had done, his personality, and was so fascinated with him. So it started, innocently enough, hey, can I write a little magazine article about you? And 1 month later I was in Honduras. That's done.
And how long ago was that?
That would have been January 2018. So a lifetime ago. Yeah.
And could you, for people who haven't had the pleasure of being introduced to Kurt and Carlos yet, give us a little bit more about this kind of odd couple best friendship and the secret group that they dream up?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Kurt grew up in suburban Chicago, but he really part of the Dutch Midwest, which is sort of people with Dutch descent, part of the Calvinist tradition. And him and his wife graduated from college and just said, like, we want to help the poor. And they ended up moving down to Honduras, and like, initially they just looked like a lot of the other young idealistic people doing that. But the first really radical thing that they do, where you get a sign that these are not normal altruist humanitarian missionaries, is they decide to move with their wives and kids to one of the poorest and most dangerous neighborhoods in all of Honduras, which is just not a place that people voluntarily go. So it's a very radical thing to do. It's them saying, we are willing to essentially risk our children's lives to be where we think we should be to work on this mission. And it's there that Kurt really forges this best friendship with Carlos. They are next door neighbors. They speak at length almost every single day. And Carlos, he grew up in rural Honduras, eventually moved to Tegucigalpa, and is very much rebelling against his sense that the evangelical church is just very head in the clouds and very, we need to go to heaven, that's all that matters, and we don't care what happens here. And he really feels this strong sense of rebellion against that, and that evangelicals should be helping people in the here and now. So, for the first 5, 10 years or so that they're there, they're doing all of the normal things that people do to help the poor. So they build a school, a micro-lender, health clinic, water, land titling, super commendable stuff at a very impressive degree. But there comes a point where they realize, and this is where the book starts, they realize that that can only have so much impact when there's lawlessness and when there's a gang that is killing people, hurting people, scaring the living daylights out of people, extorting businesses, making it so girls are afraid to go to school or do their jobs. And they say, we're going to take that on ourselves. And, moving to the neighborhood is one thing, but actively taking on a gang like this, which is essentially accustomed to getting away with murder, is just wildly brave. And they say, we're going to do it anyways. And, they come up with what I would say is a pretty ingenious solution to the problem. The typical solution to that problem is vigilantism. And there's a lot of that in Honduras, there's a lot of that in this book. So people take up arms, whether they're part of the police force or just part of the community, and they go and kill the kids who they think deserve to be killed. Kurt and Carlos say, we don't like that either. We actually think that's as evil as what the gangs are doing. So we're going to find this middle ground. And I'm happy to elaborate on this, but basically they start solving homicides themselves in this neighborhood, building cases, cultivating witnesses, collecting intelligence on the gang, transporting the cops where they need to go, assisting the prosecutors, and they end up having, I think, a pretty shocking amount of success with that.
Their efficacy is astonishing. But then it's sort of like watching The Wire, your book, which is like, they're really effective season 1, and then season 2 they're like, let's do maritime stuff, and then let's do education. Like Kurt and Carlos, part 1 of your book is they're really effective at curbing the murder rate in their area of Honduras. And then they're like, let's take on the labor system. And then part 3 is, let's take on the entirety of the criminal justice system. And it's still these two, 40-ish-year-old dads. And you say repeatedly that they're both extremely idealistic and extremely good people, which is not always synonymous with that level of efficacy. What do you think made them so capable of that degree of change?
Yeah, I love the way you frame that question, because I actually think there are people who end up thinking they're kind of bad people, but I actually think it's their willingness to wade into these realms where if you want to get something done, you have to make compromises to those ideals. And if you just want to be purely idealistic, then you probably aren't going to get anything done. So I think what I admire about them is they are willing to do things that they don't want to do, and there's a pragmatism that you typically don't see with these sorts of people. So a perfect example would be working with the police. So, this is a police force with assassins inside of it. This is a police force where when they arrest someone, they are probably going to beat the crap out of them after the suspect is handcuffed, where they take bribes to let people go, all of the stuff you would imagine. But they say, look, we have to work with the police in order to legally make arrests, and there's no other option. And I think what makes the story interesting is when you start seeing the success, there's also bad things happening. So they round up 12 of the gang members they want to round up, but the lawyer working for them sees the police take out an aluminum baseball bat and threaten to cripple the kids. And one kid who's sort of a more marginal gang member gets beaten up so bad, his mandible is broken, he's unable to eat solid food for a month. So it's should you keep going? Is it worth it to essentially be facilitating that type of behavior? But the gang was arrested. And I think what I admire about them is over and over again, they accept those challenges, they grapple with them in real time, they accept criticism from the people who say, no, you shouldn't be doing that. And I don't think even they would say they always made the right decisions on this journey, and they're very comfortable admitting them.
I think their ability to self-analyze and be open and vulnerable, in addition to hiring kind of a ragtag crew straight out of central casting of some of the most amazing characters I've come across. Ross described something called the Cholo effect, which I think would be worth going into just to get to, because this is obviously such a heavy subject.
Yeah.
But at its core, it's about this friendship. And it's also kind of lightened by these descriptions of these almost otherworldly characters that you're able to drop in with color and with like vivacity.
Yeah, I mean, so they have this master plan that they lay out. They have this Christian charity. They have their commitment to human rights. But they quickly learn that the type of people who are willing to essentially do espionage and investigative field work in a place like this are not choir boys. They are people with very different values from them. And the person that Becky's alluding to, Cholo, which is his nickname, and he has another name, Roberto, which is not his real name, and he has other fake names, is this guy who was formerly in the intelligence services, and he's, sort of this boulder of a man who's got a huge personality. He's very mercurial. He's very, and everything he's doing is hidden. And it's, he's saying, oh, I'm getting this information. I'm going out with the cops. We have this intelligence. We're about to make an arrest, but he's sort of self-aggrandizing, and he seems like the type of person who would be lying. And there's these little details in his stories which just seem so fantastical, and like just over and over again. And I even had this experience as a reporter in trying to like confirm these facts. Like the main thrust of what he was saying really checks out. And I would talk to former homicide detectives or prosecutors, and like this guy who was, running around the neighborhood in disguises and pretending to be a person fumigating homes and vaccinating stray dogs and like hiding in vegetation with a camera, and who just like not only is doing that but clearly loves the fact that he's doing that and talking about it, actually was doing the work, and he wedged himself between the police and this neighborhood. So if the police wanted something, to know something, they would go to him. If they were going in, he would be in the car. And, he ends up bringing, and the other thing we've only loosely talked about now is these homicide cases are really all about the witnesses, and he was sort of masterful at finding these people and convincing them to testify, which is a very hard thing to do when your life is on the line and you're not getting any compensation, you're not being relocated to, New Mexico or something, but he was able to recruit these people and protect them and disguise them, sometimes with great ingenuity. His mom sewed together these robes which looked just like burqas, and he would dress the witnesses in these burqas so people couldn't see them. If someone was a noticeable height like me, although I don't think there's anyone in Honduras as tall as me, but they would put them in a wheelchair, wheel them in. So all these just really clever tactics that he used.
But I think you really draw to the fore the risks involved in being a witness in those scenarios. When you talk about the etymology of witness, which comes from martyr, like it shares the same root word.
Yeah.
And so then I was curious if you could talk more about that, especially as it relates to what the title of the book means to you.
Yeah, I think like the book in a lot of ways is an homage to witnesses. I think like in popular culture, we're so used to like the heroism in these types of stories being focused on the detective or the prosecutor, and we're used to the break being a CSI clue or some ingenious deduction. But I think the reality is actually way more mundane than that. I think the heroism is usually like a person knows what happened, who committed the murder, and they either testify or not. And I've met some of these people, like to sit in a room with them and hear that they stepped up and testified against someone. I mean, there's people in the story who, there's another vigilante gang, and the guy, he has an arsenal of automatic assault rifles. He'll kill a kid, and then he'll go to the kid's wake and threaten everyone there that he'll kill them if they testify. He's murdering people in these very almost like performative fashions in public to just scare everyone. And you would think there's no way that anyone would ever testify against this person. But over and over again, what Kurt and Carlos and their people discover is if these witnesses are approached in the right way, not by a cop who they don't trust, but by a person working for a Christian organization who sort of understands their needs, people will do remarkable and heroic and selfless things, once again for no compensation, just because they think it's the right thing to do. And the title, I think this book, this story, these people, they kind of sit at this nexus of like Christianity and criminal justice, and I thought that phrase just kind of like also sat in that same place.
I was also, Kurt, I think in this moment now where global aid is being cut in many countries, Kurt is interestingly very convinced that development is not the route forward, and instead you describe him as saying that it's more about justice being what will help a struggling country. Does he still land there, and where do you sort of fall on that?
Yeah, well, I think he actually would be very strong in favor of like the USAID money continuing, and ASJ has over the years been supported by that. But I think his whole humanitarian hypothesis is that, he likes to riff on this proverb that has become sort of a cliche in the development world. Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And he's basically like, fish and fishing don't help if there are bullies who steal your fish, take your poles, and fence off the lake for themselves. And that's where most poor people are. And right now, if you look at the sort of global humanitarian apparatus, 99.8% of it is directed towards fish fishing, aid and development. And I think what him and Carlos are saying is like, we want way more of that to be dedicated to justice. And they're not like just pulling this out of their like butts. I mean, they live in this neighborhood for 10 years. They're working on this for 15 years before they come to that conclusion. So, and I think that's a very provocative idea, actually.
Have you seen that idea be picked up more? And do you feel like their particular tactics are scalable and applicable to other countries?
Yeah, I mean, that's like, I didn't write this book as like an advocate of their idea, but I do think it's certainly a fascinating question. I mean, they have great success in their own neighborhood, and then in around like 2014 or 2015, they get funding to do a replication study. So they go into like, 4 or 5 of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Tegucigalpa and San Pedro Sula to kind of answer this question. And like and now they're like, there's researchers there looking at the data, they're doing controls in other neighborhoods, and the results are incredible. Like in pretty short order, the monthly number of homicides dropped by 2/3, 75%. So I think there has been some evidence that it is transportable. And then the next question, and this is where this book started for me, is like, can it work in the south side of Chicago, where I think the dynamics are more similar than most people would think. But there's other constraints, like for example, in the United States, because of the confrontations clause in the Constitution, a witness almost never can testify under the cloak of anonymity, whereas in Honduras they can. But I don't know, I think maybe the situation here is less dangerous, maybe because of the size of our country, there's ability to relocate people more. So I certainly hope that this book will like spur that discussion.
And I'm curious too, because the book is so vividly written, what the process of reporting it was for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best decision that I made was to live in Nueva Suyapa, which is the neighborhood that I write about. Just because being there day in and day out, you just get so much information about it. I lived with a family, it was great. But the hard thing in Honduras is just like the availability of information. So like the newspaper articles are not digitized for the period I'm writing about. So you have to get into one of the few places where they have an archive and then manually go through thousands and thousands of pages of newspapers to look for a story that may or may not be there. And you may or may not know the date. And then even the court records, it's hard to know. It can be one of 6 governmental buildings, and they may not be where you think they are. They may not be properly archived. And then, and I think when you're reporting on these like sort of issues of crime and gangs and corrupt cops and stuff, it's also like not something you can just walk around and like aimlessly ask people about. So just being deliberate about how you communicate with people and who you reveal what you're doing to was another part of the challenge.
Is there anything that you wish you knew either about reporting or publishing before.
Oh my God. I mean, it was just like a comedy of errors. I mean, I'm happy I didn't communicate with you until it was almost done because I would have embarrassed myself. But yeah, I just screwed up everything at every possible stage in terms of navigating publishing, the reporting, the organization of my notes, the writing. It was all very poorly done at the beginning. I think one of my biggest mistakes was just like massively over-reporting and like trying to get information on stories, which had I done this before, I think I would have known never would have fit in the book. And I
don't know if you ever I don't know that.
Okay, I'm sure. But no, I'll just say I had an amazing, I want to give her a shout out, I had an amazing mentor, the woman who wrote the book Ghetto Side, which I mentioned, like just totally took me under her wing, like from beginning to end, and like kind of, as I made these mistakes, at least showed me how to correct them.
Guys, I don't know if we want, it is really hot. If we want to move to some Q&A whenever you're ready.
Yeah.
And then also we have book signing and plenty of more drinks and cheese and stuff after.
That was actually my last question before we turn it over to Q&A, especially since we're a room full of friends and everyone also has questions for us. So.
When you went down and lived in Honduras, what did people make of you? Like, what were they curious? Like, why? Like, you obviously come from a different background. I don't think you like had experience in that country before.
Yeah.
Why were they curious about why you were interested in this or what you were doing there? How did you build that kind of rapport and trust with people?
Well, I mean, I'm like, one thing I will say, which you'll probably find amusing, is like I'm freakishly tall anywhere, but like in Honduras, I stood out like even more like a sort of thumb. Yeah, I mean, especially in the neighborhood, I didn't want people to know I was a journalist, like asking about the gang there. So I think, what I will say is like, missionaries do come through. Different types of charity workers. Different charity workers will come through now and then. And I guess an additional like cover, if you want to call it, would be Kurt is a study abroad professor. So he used to have students come down and stay with families in Nueva Suyapa, and had been doing that for a long time. So I'm sure people assumed I was just kind of part of that network. But yeah, I mean, it's very like in terms of building. I think it would have been so much easier if like I had been a stringer in Honduras before and had all my connections and network, because that was a huge challenge, was like meeting the people, and it kind of started with a charity and then slowly branched out, and like by the end it got so much easier, because if I had a question or needed to find a prosecutor, I could just like message one of 4 prosecutors I knew. But at the beginning it was very hard to establish those relationships.
Was there any point where you felt, or and there must have been a point where you felt physically threatened, or like, did you ever second guess your resolve to report the story?
I think the only thing that felt a little bit like being in the neighborhood day to day was not scary. I just got used to it. The neighborhood's very like sectorized, if that's even a word. So I kind of just knew which areas of it they knew that family, and I was comfortable walking around and being normal. But I think the thing that is got scary sometimes is when you're writing about these things, there's like the people who know the most about the gang, killing, the corrupt, whatever, are like people who are either involved or tangentially involved. So like you have to decide, like, do I expose myself to this person, meet with them in some place to try to get that information I desperately want, but in asking them those questions, they now know what I'm looking into, and they could report it back to the person I don't want to know. I'm running around Honduras asking about them. So nothing like, there's no threats, but there was a few where after I did that, I was kind of like, I regret talking to that person.
Congratulations.
The New York Times described your book, which is a big deal. I got a really good review in the New York Times, as an unexpected thriller. And actually, this question could be for both of your books. But I'm wondering, when you started researching and writing this, did you know that, or intend for the story to be, did you know the story would lend itself to sort of a narrative of thriller narrative structure, or did that kind of happen and evolve naturally as you wrote it and edited it?
Yeah, that was like apparent like from the start. That was the first thing, because like as Becky was saying, like he's like this unassuming guy. He's definitely not nerdy, but he's like kind of very analytical, and you know, he's from the Midwest. And like when I heard him describing the events of his life in this very like plain way, I was just like, wow, that's so wild and crazy. And like, you know, I was really sort of interested in reading these types of books, and it kind of resonated with me as like something that could fit that mold. So yeah.
First of all, so happy for you and proud of you. This is incredible. I'm wondering if you learned anything surprising about yourself through the period of time where you wrote this or in writing it.
I mean, the limits of my own competence. Honestly, like I started this, I was like, oh, this will take, you know, a couple years, and it's just like over and over again, like, you know, I didn't get the information I wanted, the draft wasn't good enough, the agent rejected me, the publishing house rejected me, and like they were right, it just wasn't, I wasn't able to get it as good as it should be, so it took me a very long time to get it to a serviceable level. So yeah, it was definitely a humbling experience.
How did you balance getting Kurt's input with telling the story you wanted to tell versus the story you wanted to tell, if there was such an exchange? Especially maybe sharing drafts, getting his sign off on sort of factual things, but making sure he wasn't massaging it more than you gave input.
Yeah, so this is a huge thing. I mean, they do it's a charity, so they do fundraising, and part of fundraising is storytelling. So they're going, you know, he travels around churches and has his donor base, and he tells his story in the way he tells it, which is very like, I would call it the PG version, and it works, and they've been doing it for years, and like, for example, this colorful, complicated, problematic character, Cholo, either isn't mentioned, or he's like an ex-cop that helped us find good cops. So, you know, when I started to work on this, I wanted to do it as like a serious, independent journalist. And one thing that entailed was telling Kurt, like, I'm gonna spend 1 million hours with you, I need all this material from you, but you're gonna have no control over what I say, I'm just gonna do my best. And I think it's like, sort of, and Carlos as well, but it was at that point I was more interfacing with Kurt. And like it just kind of shows their propensity for risk taking in some ways, that they were like, sure, you can do it. And they were very supportive. He gave me thousands of pages of his personal emails, documents, everything, and he did not get to see it until it was done. Yeah, so they had no control over it. And yeah, that's a weird experience. I mean, for me, for him, for Carlos, to read about yourselves and have it presented in a different way. So, but he was a great subject in that sense. Yeah. Ryan, how much time do you think you have for more? Do you more?
I 3 more at least, I think.
Okay. So you were,
now this giant thing that you've fallen into, and told this amazing story, you've done other things in your life that have kind of led to these things. What's next? Is this your new passion? Have you figured that out? Is it, obviously it's still very fresh and new, but how are you thinking about what is the next thing that Ross does?
I want to hear Becky's answer to that also.
I recognize there's actually that have children that's very much like, hey, you just got married or you having kids.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, well, yeah, I did just get married. And yeah, I mean, no, my wife is Naya is here and extremely supportive of me doing this work in every single way possible. But I think it's hard. I think I would imagine it's hard to find a topic you are so interested in that you would want to throw yourself into it for 7 years. You're alone, thinking about these like guys and what their work, and like you have to be obsessed with it. So I think you have to find something you're that passionate about. So it's like, can I do that? So I don't know. I kind of just want to see how like this part of the process feels, and then goes. But I would like to, in a perfect world, continue doing this work. And as I said, like I really learned how to do it, and I would love to continue to learn how to get better. And So yeah, we'll see. But I want to hear.
I think the feeling after working on something that was such a single-minded goal for so long was sort of similar to what they described sailors coming to shore after being away for years at a time, and they, instead of getting seasick, they get land sick. And that's kind of how it felt to me, where it was just like you are so driven by a single North Star and then you've reached it, which is a very lucky feeling, but then it's very disorienting. And so for a while I was swimming in the North Sea, or I think it's the North Sea in Edinburgh, because it like felt less painful than writing a book in the winter.
Actually.
Yeah.
Metaphorically.
Not metaphorically, like literally swimming. And then there was a period where I was like, maybe I don't have to write another one. Maybe like it was this one thing that I had to do, because it is so hard to find another thing that you care about that much. And so I like tried a bunch of different things, and now I've like kind of gotten wormholed into exactly the thing that I didn't think I would do, which is another New England-based historical mystery with probably a disappointing ending. So like, good luck.
So I guess I'm going back to Central America.
So I was wondering if the way you're so careful saying like Cholo is unreliable at times with the stories, it made me think like, was there anything that you decided to leave out of the book that you sort of really wanted to put in there, but you couldn't, either because of the length of the book or because you didn't have enough hard evidence that it was, you just decided, oh, we're going safety, like now the book's out there, and you can go back there. But it's like that, the editing process or hard?
I mean, so much got cut out. Like I think this is maybe like 80 or 85,000 words. Like my first draft was like 160,000 words. So like a lot got, and like when I wrote that first draft, it was already painful to cut stuff out. So it's just been a process of just like hacking it back. And then in terms of just like, there's a lot of stuff I wasn't able to confirm. And actually, I think one of the interesting takeaways from the story is one consequence of impunity is not just violence, it's also confusion. Because the way that we in society like hammer down the truth is often through courts. And there's a judge, there's a defense, there's a prosecution, each side presents it, and the judge, the jury says, this is what happened. But when there's so few convictions, you don't really know. Like, they're saying this gang is killing a ton of people, but are they really the ones responsible? They're saying the police is killing a bunch of people, but like, to what extent is that true? So there is this element of ambiguity and confusion, and I think instead of like cutting that out, that actually just becomes part of the story and like what I'm trying to communicate. So even with the Cholo stuff, like I'm pretty transparent about how I'm thinking through, is what he's saying real, or how much of it is, how much isn't. So
Last question?
Oh, well, we'll do two, but Will.
I know it's already fresh, but now that this is out, what has been the impact in terms of the people that you write about, the community that you write about, and also you and the opportunities that you have for what's next, or how you think about what's next?
I mean, it's kind of just starting, like, I'm a nobody author, this is an obscure topic, so I think it's going to take some time for people to like notice it, but I mean, the charity, the subjects, they've read the book, and I think there's a number of things they don't like about it and would rather, or would have said differently, but all in all, they like it, and I think they feel that it will help them like spread their story and their message a little bit, so they're planning to do that. That'll be really interesting to know, like, there's other charities who are kind of similar that have way bigger public profiles. The founder gets invited to speak at huge conferences. These guys have been more under the radar, so it will be interesting to see if this helps them widen their audience. And then for me, we'll see. We'll see what happens. I don't know. We're just getting started.
Would it be harder to go back there now?
I don't know. I mean, some of the people I write about who are sort of not good people are dead. Some are maybe dead. I'd like to go back. I made a lot of relationships and friendships down there. So, I'll definitely go back. And just one more quickly, Fred, my father-in-law.
Congratulations, incredible accomplishment. So what it is in Netflix series? You want to be part of the writers? You're going to be like Carlos and let them do everything.
Yeah, I don't think so. I probably would rather just like have someone who really knows what they're doing do it. I feel like I've spent so much time on this. I kind of like said what I needed to say, and I think it would be really cool to see an adaptation. I think it would help like get more people aware of the story. But I don't feel a need to do it myself.
You hate it.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be hard to see. But anyways, I just want to thank Becky first of all. Super nice of her to come and ask these thoughtful questions. I would like to thank all of you. You know, when you work on this type of thing, it's like you're all alone. It feels like you're kind of a crazy person doing it. So the fact that like this many of you came out to show interest, I really appreciate. And then Ryan, like, just what a freaking amazing. Like, he completely organized all of this. He was here all day, setting it up, running around. So it was like,
There you go.
really great.
You're just still chasing the guy?